Everyone knows of Nintendo in the 1980s, but what about the 1880s? In this episode, we go really retro. Hi everyone, what's up? John here. If you're watching this on September 23rd, 2016, it's Nintendo's 127th birthday. Yes indeed, though the video game giant is well over a century old, they didn't start out by making video games, obviously. But they were involved with games, as they started by making playing cards back in 1889. Hanafuda playing cards, like these ones here, were used for a variety of games, such as Koi Koi. By the way, you should totally check out Summer Wars. It's an anime film that includes some Koi Koi action. It's awesome. Now, the fact that Nintendo has been around since before the 20th century and made Hanafuda cards is not entirely uncommon knowledge. I'm sure that many hardcore gamers are aware of this trivia. But how many of you know about Nintendo after its humble beginnings, yet before the arcade era? That's about 90 years. So what was Nintendo up to then? If you didn't know, I have a number of video game related books. One of my favorites is this book right here, The History of Nintendo, Volume 1, 1889 to 1980. It's written by Florin Gorges in collaboration with Isao Yamazaki and published by Pix and Love Publishing, originally in French but translated into English. It's over 240 pages with thousands of color images, cataloging 9 decades of Nintendo memorabilia before the world even heard of Donkey Kong or Mario. The book is divided into 8 chapters, each covering distinct eras or product lines. The first chapter has a lot of text, with a historical perspective of the company. It even describes the background of Japanese card games, going as far back as the Muromachi era, 1300s to the 1500s, when Portuguese sailors introduced card games to the Japanese. But when the Edo era began, the Shogun Tokugawa was concerned about the influence of European missionaries, so they closed their borders and repressed Western culture from the early 1600s to the late 1800s. Western entertainment, including playing cards, were banned. But the Japanese gamers would not stop playing, so they modified the rules and illustrations, and Hanafuda cards were born. These card games were still banned, but they continued to be played underground. Until the government relaxed the restrictions on gambling and Hanafuda card manufacturing in 1885. And only a few years later, on September 23rd, 1889, Fujisawa Yamauchi opened up a card shop in Kyoto, and that is how Nintendo's story begins. After this first chapter, the rest of the book is an incredible photo gallery catalog of Nintendo products, most of which were released only in Japan. Chapter 2, all about playing cards, shows us Hanafuda cards, Western playing cards, and cards for use in magic tricks. In 1959, he secured a contract with Disney, so they produced a number of Disney playing card decks. Chapter 3 is all about toys and games, which began in the mid-1960s. Gunpei Yokoi, who you should know as the creator of the D-Pad, Game Boy, and the Metroid series, was a maintenance manager who was secretly designing toys in his office, using scraps from maintenance equipment. One day he was caught with one of his toys, but instead of getting in trouble, he was put in charge of designing toys for Nintendo. The toy he was caught with would become the Ultra Hand, which has made cameo appearances in a number of video games. Besides toy gadgets like that, they would also make doll houses, puzzles, and board games. One particularly interesting product are these N&B blocks, which were building blocks very similar to Lego bricks. Lego took Nintendo to court, yet Nintendo was allowed to continue making the N&B blocks. Despite this, they eventually stopped. I don't know how long intercompany grudges last, if that even really is a thing between Nintendo and Lego, but one might speculate that might be why we don't have Nintendo-themed Lego sets, and have to settle for Nintendo Connect stuff. Again, it's just speculation. Chapter 4 delves into board games, including classics like Mahjong and chess. Nintendo even brought over Milton Bradley's classic party game Twister to Japan, though it did not sell well with Japanese people at the time that were typically uncomfortable with physical contact and awkward positions, so it was re-released with an emphasis on the benefits of gymnastic stretching, as praised by a healthcare professional. Sounds like a Wii Fit, if you ask me. As with the card games, Nintendo had the license to make a number of Disney-themed board games as well. As the 20th century rolls on, Chapter 5 shows us Nintendo's electronic devices. You may have seen this in WarioWare. They made a remote-controlled vacuum, called it Shitori. From the front, it looks kind of like a Virtual Boy. Insert your own joke here about how they both also suck. They also made other devices, such as a periscope, a love tester, hey, Nintendo's not just for kids, a ball pitching machine, which also made some video game cameos, and a series of guns that shoot light and targets that react to them, including the original version of Duck Hunt. In 1971, Nintendo released a walkie-talkie that transmitted communications using light, and apparently has amazing clarity and fidelity. Chapter 6 gets a little bizarre with miscellaneous products such as Disney-themed instant rice, strollers, cotton candy machines, and photocopiers. Gamers joke about how everyone copies Nintendo. Looks like they've done some copying of their own. Nintendo had apparently invested in a taxi company and even owned some sleazy love hotels. Once again, there have been times when Nintendo was definitely not for kids. And Chapter 7 brings us arcade games. Now this might be familiar. One of the earliest references in Super Smash Bros. Is of the arcade game Sheriff, which appeared in 1979. And even though the cover of the book says it goes up to 1980, we see Nintendo's arcade machines from the early 1980s. And finally, Donkey Kong. Last but not least, we have the 8th and final chapter, which covers their first video game consoles. Yep, the NES that we all love is actually not the first of Nintendo's game consoles. In the late 1970s, we have a series of color TV games, including the color TV game block Kazushi that you see on the front cover here. And finally, there's a quick overview of the Game & Watch games. But Volume 2, which is dedicated to the Game & Watch, goes into that series in much more detail, which I may talk about at a later date. Hopefully they can get around to finishing Volumes 3 and 4 and translate them into English, as they're supposed to be on the NES and the Game Boy, respectively. Though I've shared what seems like a lot from this book, this is all just scratching the surface of the history of Nintendo. If you are a Nintendo fan, and who wouldn't be, they've been making games for over 120 years. If you are hardcore enough to be curious about their pre-video game days, I certainly must recommend this book. It might not be so easy to get a hold of one though, even though Pix and Love Publishing was very kind to personally thank me for purchasing this book. As you can see by the sticky note here, it's actually a little hard to recommend buying from their website. Though they're apparently good on the French side of things, I've heard that in the past couple years, buying English versions of their books doesn't always pan out, and contacting the international customer service or posting on their Facebook page doesn't seem to get much of a response. So instead, look on places like Amazon, but be prepared to pay as much for this book as like 1 or 2 video games. But hey, if you're a Nintendo fan, there's probably not many games you need to buy right now. Bad joke, I know. But seriously, this book is recommended. Hey, if you like this video, subscribe to this channel, the like button, share us on Facebook, and all that good stuff. Also check out my website, vgmaps.com, the video game atlas. There's over 35,000 maps from video games, Nintendo or otherwise. And hey, if you want to support me, consider buying a Nintendo Quest DVD. This is a documentary film directed by my friend Rob McCallum about his friend Jay Bartlett as he tries to collect all the NES game cartridges within 1 month with no online purchases. And this is the exclusive Kickstarter version that includes an audio commentary not found anywhere else. Thanks for watching. See you later.